the house and it's cold.
Okay, let's get started. Hey everyone, Stephen Pedigo here, professor at, 1 second, she'll tell us when, just write the word go and we'll go when you're ready for us, Victoria. Hey everyone, Stephen Pedigo here, director of the LBJ Urban Lab, professor at the LBJ School. Happy to be joined with my colleague, Sherri Greenberg, to talk a little bit about what's happened this week in Texas with the collapse of the energy grid and all that jazz and what it means for the future. Sherri, hope you're feeling a little bit warmer today.
Yes, Stephen, I am feeling a little bit warmer. Had a power outage, as we all know, a statewide crisis. My power was out from Sunday until Friday, and I hope that those who are listening now have power and hopefully water too. It's been quite the cascading crisis.
Yeah, it's been we were joking, the episode of Austin Survivor one day after the next. So Sherri, what are your thoughts on what does this long term mean for Texas in terms of the way the state is positioning itself for growth?
Well, that's a really good question, what it means. There was an article, I think it was on Wired yesterday, right, asking Texas still going to be the California tech relocation mecca, whether it's from California or Boston or others, where people were saying, wait a minute, it might be warm, but you all don't know how to deal with disasters. You don't have the resiliency. I think that we're going to see some changes. I don't know what exactly, but as we're aware, the governor has already put forth a proclamation saying that you cannot, energy companies cannot send these huge bills. You can't, cut off power. There are hearings scheduled in the state Senate and the state House of Representatives this week. The legislature's in session right now, but we have a unique system with our grid because unless you're in the Panhandle or El Paso or a small portion of East Texas, you are in the Texas grid, which is its own grid. And we have seen the issues arise from that, whether it was a lack of weatherization, with gas plants, with one of the plants at South Texas, the nuclear, and then that cascade into the situation where we had pipes breaking, we didn't have water pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, so the grid is interesting to me. I'm not an energy guy, not an expert at all, but I think for me, like what's interesting about this is just a larger question about how Texas is managing its growth, right? And so what are we now? The second largest state in the country.
Right.
You look at the top 15 metros across the country, we have a fastest growing, we have a whole handful of those. And really the question is the current sort of laissez-faire conservative government that meets every couple of years, that is sort of hands off, is it going to be the right level of government and engagement to manage some of the growth challenges that the state faces going forward? I'm not so sure, actually.
Well, right. And so what you're talking about is the fact that we have a biennial legislature.
That's right.
We meet, in regular session every other year, and odd years we're meeting now. However, I will say that there's a lot of work that goes on in the interim with those interim committee assignments, and the governor can always call for special sessions. I think to me, the bigger question is infrastructure. Are we going to get to the place where we have the resiliency we need, both with weatherization, for instance, with the grid, with peak summer demand, roads, other infrastructure. We are a huge growing state and economy, and we need to make sure that we have the resiliency in our infrastructure.
Yeah, it just comes back to this idea of Texas realizing that it's an urban state, right? 9 in 10 Texans live in metro areas. Most of the economic development and most of the economic growth is in metropolitan areas. And for me, like when you look at the legislature and you look at the way we sort of position Texas, I still think there's this disconnect between who we sort of are in terms of our ethos and the way we've approached our governance and our policy. And the reality is that we perhaps are facing much of the growth challenges that California and New York and everyone else is facing. In fact, I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with Texas Monthly, and what I said was, we are facing the same issues that those other states that we like to sort of push out but we're just late to the party, right? And maybe, frankly, don't have the tool set available to our cities and our local officials to address some of those challenges, perhaps.
Well, as you said, we're at the grown-up table now, right? And since we're at the grown-up table, we are going to have to act like grown-ups. And that means putting in the policies that we need to be able to function as this huge state. And I think that this is the time to do it. And there are a whole array of policies that I would say we need to address. Some of them are at the state level, some of them are at local levels.
Yeah, but isn't it maybe the idea of maybe thinking about how we return more power back to locals and cities and counties where, if you look over time, right, the legislature has continually marched in a direction to erode at the power of cities and power of counties. And, if you think about it, right, in my mind, like that is like the antithesis of what conservative government is. Conservative government actually says you bring government closest to the people at the local and state level, perhaps.
Well, and as a matter of fact, that's how the Texas Constitution was written.
That's right.
After the war, Reconstruction, Texans felt like the North had sent down these king-like governors to run roughshod. So when the state constitution was written, right, as I say, everything, including dog catcher, was elected, and power, at the smallest level you can have. The tax bills have to emanate from the House. Because that is a smaller unit of government. But what we've seen is not just in Texas, but nationwide, particularly, really over the past 20 years, but particularly over the past decade, nationwide, this move to have less in the way of local control and more in the way of state preemption in the state legislatures. And we have certainly seen that here in Texas. And as a matter of fact, if you have looked at legislation that has been filed and statements that were made, right, going into this legislative session, what was stated is that you're going to see, in fact, more state preemption.
Yeah, and I wonder, right, I mean, for a state that is 30 million people, 26 metropolitan areas, diverse issues, like North Texas is facing way different challenges than we do here in Austin, and Houston's different from us, and El Paso is different from like, is that even good governance, right? I mean, is that smart governance in a way to manage growth? I'm not so sure. Again, I mean, I think like one of the things that I keep coming back to is that by limiting the powers in counties, what you're essentially doing is also, you're almost in a sense stopping short any type of local innovation or any interesting sort of mechanisms to address some of these problems at the local level. And are you kind of snuffing out that possible opportunity for civic innovation to
right? We've seen innovation happening at the local level because, frankly, it has not been partisan, right? At the local level, people know the people they're voting for. It's not as partisan. Yes, county commissioners do run here with a party affiliation, but if you look at cities, for instance, they're not running on a party platform. People just want things to work, as we have seen. Yeah. They want their power, they want their water, they want their potholes fixed. But and so it's been a level where we can have that type of innovation. The other point that I would say as far as Texas is we're about 5 different states. Right? If you look at Texas, I really divide us into about 5 different states. And we have different cultures, we have different geography, topography, populations, cultures. And looking at that, there is a need, I believe, for at the county and at the city level to be able to adapt, right, locally to what is applicable for that topography, geography, culture, population level. Is it urban, rural, suburban, all of the above? We need to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean the 5 is interesting, but even more, like you even simplify it and say it's urban and part of the issue is that everyone says, well, it's Texas, is it R versus D? And I actually don't think it is much about that. I mean, that's not really as much it is. A lot of times it's urban versus rural, right? And
sometimes it's urban and rural versus suburban, right?
Yeah,
so there are certain issues that you see that urban and rural coalitions versus suburban. And we've seen this historically with, particularly with healthcare and with school funding, right? Yeah. And transportation, where you have urban areas and you have and rural areas that are looking, and their elected leaders are looking and going, well, we don't have high property taxes because our property taxes values are so low in this urban area or in this rural area, we don't have we don't have healthcare either in this inner city area or in this rural area. We need more doctors, right? Or school finance or transportation. And so it's interesting to see that coalition that will pop up on these different areas between, in fact, the urban and rural versus the suburban.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you think comes out of this, right? Do you think substantial? I mean, obviously, we're all going to talk about the grid for the next 6 months, and there'll be some tweaking on the edges and that. But has this really, in a sense, brought more attention to the fact that as a state, we're growing really fast? We're, we love to tout the headlines that Tesla or HP or Oracle have come to our state. But man, we haven't really managed growth really well. Like, what does that look from your perspective? Like, what does it look like for a state? And you've served in the legislature, so that really well. Yes. Like, how does the state go forward in terms of managing growth? And will it pull itself to the big boy, big girl table and say, look, or the adult table, however you want to say it, and say, we're willing to start managing the growth? Do you think we get there out of this? Maybe
we'll see. But I have seen with some prior crises and catastrophes that lawmakers do come together, right? Whether it was with hurricanes or lack of water, right? Yeah. And those are two that I can think of where lawmakers really do in the state of Texas, in the legislature, put party aside. And this has been such a unthinkable, catastrophic statewide crisis. Yeah. And you combine that with what we've seen with COVID-19, right? And whether it's testing or getting vaccines rolled out, we have situations right now where we have to make some changes. And they are situations that it doesn't matter what party you are, what part of the state you're living in. It does matter as far as socioeconomic and people of color being hit much harder. And it has accelerated that and brought that to the forefront for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, it's this thing, we're really good highway builders in the state of Texas, right? Like, we build lots of highways. We're pretty good at that. But the other question is, like, how do we take those same sort of investments in that type of infrastructure and apply it to other infrastructure? And look, we ain't even able to, I mean, this is even talking about the, multimodal public transit infrastructure that's actually needed to make our metros work and function in a way where they can actually, continue to grow in a way that's going to be resilient and sort of sustainable going forward. So, any last thoughts on this as you hopefully sit warm in your house now, as you're sort of looking to advice maybe you'd have for policy leaders?
My advice for policy leaders would be put aside all of the bickering. We are at the adult table now. Put aside the bickering and look to this as we have in prior times, right? Where we see that we have to rise to the occasion. We have to invest in our state and do what's needed for our state now.
Yeah, and I would build on that. The last comment I would build on that is that Texas is a place that touts the free market, right? We love the free market. Right. We love business-friendly culture. And so one of the things that I think we should do more of is engage that private sector, right? Engage the private sector to build better shared value on addressing some of these issues, through new public-private partnerships, getting our private sector involved in our economic development and public health crisis and infrastructure issues. And maybe, frankly, it will hopefully be the private sector that pushes on our policy and our state and our state leaders and our governor and our local leaders to actually start to address some of these issues. Maybe.
Well, actually, we've seen some of that. As a matter of fact, already, particularly with leaders in the business community, whether it's in Houston or Austin or others, saying, look, we have to rise to the occasion. And whether it's dealing with getting vaccines rolled out or people experiencing homelessness, or we're going to have to have weatherization in the grid. Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So, okay, Sherri, great chatting.
Yes. Take care, Stephen.
See you around. Cheers.
All right. Bye-bye.